Everything looks tasty, if I may say so.
I do hope the meat isn't dry, John. You know I don't like it overcooked.
I know, Mum. Don't worry.
If I'd known you'd be so late coming home from church...
Well, I can't always know how long Reverend Blanchette is going to preach, can I? It's not as if I can stand up and shout, "Pardon me, Reverend, but could you cut it short? My mother's waiting for me at home and the roast is burning in the oven."
Oh.
Please pass the gravy.
I only meant that we've been eating later and later on Sundays, and the meat has been drier and drier since you've been in this church phase.
Phase? Please, Mum, let's not be condescending about it.
Well, I don't know what else to call it.
Then don't call it anything. Would you like some Yorkshire pudding?
If it's not too much trouble.
It's not too much trouble.
Yes, yes.
I thought you'd be pleased.
I am. But you must press home your advantage.
My advantage?
The enemy will be working on the patient from the center outwards, gradually bringing more and more of his conduct under the new standard of his Christianity. It may reach his behavior to the old lady at any moment.
Look, Mum, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap.
It's all right, dear.
Ah, you see, you want to get in first. Where is Glubose?
She's hiding the carcass of a dead mouse behind the wall. She heard you were coming. Well, you do sort of make her nervous.
Rightfully so. She was never the best of students. In any event, keep in close touch with her, since she is in charge of the mother. Build up between your patient and the mother a good settled habit of mutual annoyance. Daily pinpricks?
Pinpricks?
Yes, there are several useful methods to employ. Make note.
Right. Yes, okay, ready?
First, you must keep his mind on the inner life. He thinks his conversion is something inside him, and his attention is therefore chiefly turned at present to the states of his own mind. Encourage this. Keep his mind off the basic humdrum everyday duties of life by misdirecting it to what he imagines are the most advanced and spiritual ones. For example, you must bring him to a condition where he can practice self-examination for an hour without discovering any of those facts about himself which are perfectly clear to anyone who has ever spent any time with him.
Self-examination. Right, got it?
Good. Second, it is no doubt impossible to prevent his praying for his mother. But we have means of rendering the prayers innocuous. Make sure that they are always very spiritual. That he is always concerned with the state of her soul and never with her rheumatism. Two advantages will follow. In the first place, his attention will be kept on what he regards as her sins, by which, with a little guidance from you, he can be induced to mean any of her actions which are inconvenient or irritating to himself. Thus, you can keep rubbing the wounds of the day a little sorer, even while he is on his knees. The operation is not at all difficult.
Yeah, and I do find it rather entertaining.
It is, believe me. In the second place, since his ideas about her soul will be very crude and often erroneous, he will, in some degree, be praying for an imaginary person. It will be your task to make that imaginary person daily less and less like the real mother, the sharp-tongued old lady at the table. In time, you may get the rift so wide that no thought or feeling from his prayers for the imagined mother will ever flow over into his treatment of the real one.
Brilliant.
I know. Now, when two humans have lived together for many years, it usually happens that each has tones of voice and expressions of face which are most unendurably irritating to the other. Work on that. Bring fully into the consciousness of your patient that particular lift of the old mother's eyebrows which he learned to dislike as a child, and let him think, how much he dislikes it. Let him assume that she also knows how annoying it is, and does it to annoy.
I know the kind of thing. You leave it to me.
And of course, never let him suspect that he has tones and looks which similarly annoy her. As he cannot see or hear himself, this is very easily managed.
Very easily managed.
Third, In civilized life, domestic hatred usually expresses itself by saying things which would appear quite harmless on paper. The words, in and of themselves, are not offensive, but... Take those words, the same words, and apply a particular tone of voice at a particular moment, and they are not far short of a blow in the face, delivered with the utmost innocence. Your patient then is able to take offense at something his mother says, while she does the same on the other end. It is a remarkable double standard which you and Glubose must maintain.
Maintained in what way?
Well, your patient must demand that all his own utterances are to be taken at their face value and judged simply on the actual words, while at the same time judging all his mother's utterances with the fullest and most oversensitive interpretation of that tone and the context and the suspected intention.
Right.
She must be encouraged to do the same to him. Hence, from every quarrel, they can both go away convinced, or very nearly convinced, that they are quite innocent.
Yes, I know the sort of thing you mean. He thinks, I simply ask her what time dinner will be and she flies into a temper.
Precisely.
Yes.
Once this habit is very well established, you will have the delightful situation of a human saying things with the express purpose of offending and yet having a grievance when offense is taken.
Delightful.
Finally, tell me something about the old lady's religious position. Is she at all jealous of the new factor in her son's life? At all piqued that he should have learned from others, and so late, what she considers she gave him such good opportunity of learning in childhood? Does she feel he is making a great deal of fuss about it, or that he's getting in on very easy terms? Remember the elder brother in the enemy story they call the prodigal son?
Right. I'll speak with Glubose.
Then, if you don't bungle it, you should have this situation well in hand.
Uncle,
Ah, Wormwood.
you summoned me.
I did. Do sit down.
Where?
On that spike.
Right. I believe I'll stand.
Suit yourself. My dear Wormwood, the amateurish suggestions in your last report warn me that it's high time for us to talk about the painful subject of prayer.
Prayer. But I did as you said, Uncle, and found that your advice about my patient's prayers for his mother proved, well, singularly unfortunate.
That is not the sort of thing that a nephew should say to his uncle, nor a junior tempter to the under-secretary of a department. It also reveals an unpleasant desire to shift responsibility. You must learn to pay for your own blunders.
I'm at a loss.
Indeed. The best thing, where it is possible, is to keep the patient from the serious intention of praying altogether. When the patient is an adult, recently reconverted to the enemy's party, like your man, this is best done by encouraging him to remember, or to think he remembers, the parrot-like nature of his prayers in childhood. In reaction against that, he may be persuaded to aim at something entirely spontaneous, inward, informal, and irregular. And what this will actually mean to a beginner will be an effort to produce in himself a vaguely devotional mood in which real concentration of will and intelligence have no part. This is the sort of prayer that we want, where the patient attempts to conjure a feeling of love and supplication. And since it bears a superficial resemblance to the prayer of silence, as practiced by those who are very far advanced in the enemy's service, clever and lazy patients can be taken in by it for quite a long time.
Right.
At the very least, they can be persuaded that the bodily position makes no difference to their prayers. For they constantly forget what you must always remember, that they are animals, and that whatever their bodies do affects their souls. It is really funny how mortals always picture us as putting things into their minds. In reality, our best work is done by keeping things out.
Oh, I had no idea.
Look, if this fails, you must fall back on a subtler misdirection of his intention. Whenever they are attending to the enemy himself, we are defeated. But there are ways of preventing them from doing so. The simplest is to turn their gaze away from him towards themselves. Keep them watching their own minds and trying to produce feelings by the action of their own wills. When they meant to ask him for charity, let them instead start trying to manufacture charitable feelings for themselves. And not notice that this is what they are doing. And when they meant to pray for courage, let them be trying to feel brave. And when they say they are praying for forgiveness, let them be trying to feel forgiven. Teach them to estimate the value of each prayer by their success in producing the desired feeling, and never let them suspect how much success or failure of that kind depends on whether they are well or ill, fresh or tired at the moment.
But working with the patient while he prays is risky, isn't it? The enemy is there.
This is a fact. Wherever there is prayer, there is danger of the enemy's own immediate action. He is cynically indifferent to the dignity of his position, and ours as pure spirits. To those human animals on their knees, he pours out self-knowledge in a quite shameless fashion, but even if he defeats your first attempt at misdirection, we have an advantage. The humans do not start from an immediate perception of him which we unhappily cannot avoid, for they have never known that ghastly luminosity, that stabbing, that searing glare which brings a permanent pain to the background of our lives. If you look into your patient's mind when he is praying, you will not find any of that.
Then what is he imagining about the enemy when he prays?
Any number of ridiculous ideas. There will be images derived from pictures of the enemy as he appeared during the discreditable episode known as the Incarnation. There will be vaguer, perhaps quite savage and puerile images associated with the other two persons. There will even be some of his own ideas made up out of his times of reverence, which he has objectified and attributed to an object. I have known cases where what the patient called his God was actually located up and to the left at the corner of the bedroom ceiling, or inside his own head, or in a crucifix on the wall. But whatever the nature of the object, you must keep him praying to it, to the thing that he has made, not to the person who has made him. Otherwise, well, our situation will become rather desperate.
Desperate, Uncle.
Yes. Once all his false images and objects have been flung aside, and the man trusts himself to the completely real, external, invisible presence there with him in the room, why, then the incalculable may occur.
How do I prevent that from happening?
Well, you are helped by the fact that the humans themselves do not desire it as much as they think they do. There is such a thing as getting more than they bargained for.
Yes.
Oh, do shut up and get out.
Diese Deutschen sind und ebenfalls Geschöpfe Gottes. Der Allmächtige hat sie nicht geschaffen, damit sie zur universalen Staatskonstruktion einer fremden, ihnen verhassten Gewalt ausgeliefert werden.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
My dear Wormwood, It is disappointing to expect a detailed report on your work and to receive instead such a vague rhapsody as your last letter. You say you are delirious with joy because the European humans have started another of their wars. Well, I see very well what has happened to you. You are not delirious. You are only drunk. Reading between the lines in your very unbalanced account of the patient's sleepless night, I can reconstruct your state of mind fairly accurately. For the first time in your career, you have tasted the wine, which is the reward of all our labors, the anguish and bewilderment of a human soul, and it has gone to your head. I can hardly blame you. I do not expect old heads on young shoulders. Did the patient respond to some of your terror pictures of the future? Did you work in some good self-pitying glances at the happy past? Some fine thrills in the pit of his stomach were there? You played your violin prettily, did you? Well, it's all very, very, very natural. But do remember, Wormwood, that duty comes before pleasure. If any present self-indulgence on your part leads to the ultimate loss of the prey, you will be left eternally thirsting for the draught of which you are now so much enjoying your first sip. If, on the other hand, by steady and cool-headed application here and now you can finally secure his soul, he will be then yours forever, a brimful living chalice of despair and horror and astonishment which you can raise to your lips as often as you please. So do not allow any temporary excitement to distract you from the real business of undermining faith and preventing the formation of virtues. Give me, without fail, in your next letter, a full account of the patient's reactions to the war, so that we can consider whether you are likely to do more good by making him an extreme patriot or an ardent pacifist. There are all sorts of possibilities. In the meantime, I must warn you not to hope too much from a war. Of course, a war is entertaining. The immediate fear and suffering of the humans is a legitimate and pleasing refreshment for our myriads of toiling workers. But what permanent good does it do unless we make use of it for bringing souls to our Father below? When I see the temporal suffering of humans who finally escape us, I feel as if I had been allowed to taste the first course of a rich banquet and then to be denied the rest. It's worse than having tasted it at all. The enemy, true to his barbarous methods of warfare, allows us to see the short misery of his favorites, only to tantalize and torment us, to mock the incessant hunger which, during this present phase of the great conflict, his blockade is admittedly imposing. Let us therefore think how to use, rather than to enjoy, this present European war, for it has certain tendencies inherent in it which are, in themselves, by no means in our favor. We may hope for a good deal of cruelty and unchastity, but if we are not careful, we shall see thousands turning in this tribulation to the enemy, while tens of thousands who do not go so far as that will nevertheless have their attention diverted from themselves to values and causes which they believe to be higher than the self. I know that the enemy disapproves of many of these causes, but that is where he is so unfair. He often makes prizes of humans who have given their lives for causes he thinks bad, on the monstrously sophistical ground that the humans thought them good and were following the best they knew. Consider, too, what undesirable deaths occur in wartime. Men are killed in places where they knew they might be killed, and to which they go prepared, if they are at all on the enemy's side. But how much better for us if all humans died in costly nursing homes, amid doctors who lie, nurses who lie, and friends who lie as we have trained them, promising life to the dying, encouraging the belief that sickness excuses every indulgence. vigilance, and even, if our workers know their jobs, withholding all suggestion of a priest, lest it should betray to the sick man his true condition. And how disastrous for us is the continual remembrance of death which war enforces. One of our best weapons, contented worldliness, is rendered useless. In wartime, not even a human can believe he's going to live forever. I know that Scabtree and the others have seen in wars a great opportunity for attacks on faith, but I think that view is exaggerated. The enemy's human partisans have all been plainly told by him that suffering is an essential part of what he calls redemption, so that a faith which is destroyed by a war or a pestilence cannot really have been worth the trouble of destroying. I'm speaking now of a diffused suffering over a long period, such as the war will produce. Of course, at the precise moment of terror, bereavement, or physical pain, you may catch your man when his reasons are temporarily suspended. Meanwhile, get out of your revelries and get back to work, or you know what awaits you. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
Where is he? John!
Oh, hello, Mum. Oh, dear, you haven't been sitting there the whole time, have you?
Well, I didn't know what else to do.
You could put the kettle on.
Well, in a moment. What did they say?
They didn't say much at all, actually.
Oh, they must have told you something.
Nothing helpful, I'm afraid. My age and profession make it possible, but not certain, that I will be called up for military service.
Oh. When will you know?
I haven't the foggiest. You are now as informed as I. About that tea.
Well, come into the kitchen. Surely they must have said something.
This is your progress report, Wormwood, that he may be called to military service, or he may not.
Yes, Uncle. I had hoped for a more decisive situation. Had he been called up, I could have made much of the forthcoming danger. Had he been left at home, I could have made much of the rejection, the innate feeling of rejection and cowardice. But here I see little opportunity, which is why I asked for your help.
Frankly, Wormwood, this situation abounds with opportunity. I am delighted by it.
Delighted?
Yes, we want him to be in the maximum uncertainty, so that his mind will be filled with contradictory pictures of the future, every one of which arouses hope or fear. There's nothing like suspense and anxiety for barricading a human's mind against the enemy.
How so?
Don't you understand? The enemy wants men to be concerned with what they do. Our business is to keep them thinking about what will happen to them. Your patient will, of course, have picked up the notion that he must submit with patience to the enemy's will. What the enemy means by this is primarily that he should accept with patience the tribulation which has actually been dealt out to him. The present anxiety and suspense. It is about this that he is to say, "Thy will be done." And for the daily task of bearing this, that the daily bread will be provided. It is your business to see that the patient never thinks of the present fear as his appointed cross, but only of all the things he is afraid of. Let him regard them as his crosses. Let him forget that since they are incompatible, they cannot all happen to him, and let him try to practice fortitude and patience to them all in advance.
But isn't it impossible for him to know how to respond to a dozen different and hypothetical fates?
It is, but your patient doesn't know that. Listen closely, Wormwood. This is a basic and important spiritual law.
All right.
You'll remember how I explained that you can weaken his prayers by diverting his attention from the enemy himself to his own states of mind about the enemy.
Right.
On the other hand, fear becomes easier to master when the patient's mind is diverted from the thing feared to the fear itself, considered as an undesirable state of his own mind. And when he regards the fear as his appointed cross, he will inevitably think of it as a state of mind.
It sounds complicated. Wouldn't it be simpler to use his general feelings of hatred towards the Germans? Hatred is easy to manipulate. I like hatred.
And there you show your lack of experience in education. What do you mean by hatred? Do you mean those feelings of hatred with its talk of bravado and revenge, which humans are so fond of discussing in their periodicals? You must not rely on those.
I thought revenge was one of our favorites.
To be sure, the patient can, in his anguish, be encouraged to revenge himself by some vindictive feelings directed towards the German leaders, and that is good as far as it goes. But it's usually a sort of melodramatic or mythical hatred directed against imaginary scapegoats. He's never met these people in real life. They are caricatures modeled on what he gets from newspapers. The results of such fanciful hatred are often most disappointing, and of all humans, the English are, in this respect, the most deplorable milksops. They are creatures of that miserable sort who loudly proclaim that torture is too good for their enemies, and then give tea and cigarettes to the first wounded German pilot who turns up at the back door.
It's disgustingly true.
Do what you will, there is going to be some benevolence as well as some malice in your patient's soul. The great thing is to direct the malice to the immediate neighbors whom he meets every day, and to thrust his benevolence out to the remote circumference to people he does not know. Thus malice becomes wholly real, and benevolence largely imaginary. There's no good at all in inflaming his hatred of Germans if at the same time a pernicious habit of charity is growing up between him and his mother, his employer, and the man he meets on the train.
I understand.
No, you don't. So there's no point in pretending you do. Look, you must think of your man as a series of concentric circles, his will being the innermost, his intellect coming next, and finally, his fantasy. You can hardly hope at once to exclude from all the circles everything that smells of the enemy.
You mean the Germans?
No, not them, you fool. I mean the real enemy.
Right.
He wants virtues to permeate all of those circles within the patient, especially the will, while you must keep on shoving all the virtues outwards until they are finally located in the circle of fantasy. It is only when the virtues reach the will and are there embodied in habits that they are really fatal to us.
I want to be clear. When you say his will, do you mean his resolution?
No. That is often what the patient mistakes for his will. The conscious fume and fret of resolutions and clenched teeth. No, I am talking about the real center, what the enemy calls the heart.
But aren't any virtues a worry to us, even if they reside in the circle of fantasy?
No. All sorts of virtues painted in the circle of fantasy, or approved by the intellect, or even in some measure loved and admired, will not keep a man from our Father's house. Indeed, they make him more amusing when he gets there.
It is me, Mr. Hamilton. No, that's no good.
At last, Mr. Hamilton.
That's too much. Right. So, Hamilton, we meet.
Wormwood,
Uncle,
what are you doing?
I'm, that's to say, I was just, sort of practicing.
Practicing what?
Well, I was thinking, you see, that I might make an appearance.
An appearance?
To John Hamilton, in a dream, perhaps, or in the shadows.
Why?
Well, to nudge him along. I thought if he saw me, then he'd...
What, Wormwood? What did you think?
Well, it would scare him, wouldn't it?
You young tempters are so predictable. It's all show and flash with you, when in fact it's much better to keep the patient ignorant of your existence.
Why, if I may ask?
Well, for one thing, that question, at least for the present phase of the struggle, has been answered for us by the High Command. Our policy, for the moment, is to conceal ourselves.
But it hasn't always been so.
No, we are really faced with a cruel dilemma, you see. When the humans disbelieve in our existence, we lose all the pleasing results of direct terrorism. On the other hand, when they believe in us, we cannot make them materialists and skeptics, at least not yet.
Not yet.
I have great hopes that we shall learn in due time how to emotionalize and mythologize their science to such an extent that what is in effect a belief in us, though not under that name, will creep in while the human mind remains closed to belief in the enemy.
How could we accomplish such a thing?
There are many different ways. The worship of sex, some aspects of psychoanalysis, this thing some call a life force. They may prove useful. If once we can produce our perfect work, the materialist magician, the man not using but veritably worshipping what he vaguely calls forces while denying the existence of spirits, then the end of the war will be in sight.
Oh, wondrous day.
In the meantime, we must obey our orders. I do not think you will have much difficulty in keeping the patient in the dark. The fact that devils are predominantly comic or absurdly exaggerated figures in the modern imagination will help you. If any faint suspicion of your existence begins to arise in his mind, suggest to him a picture of something in red tights. And persuade him that since he cannot believe in that, it is an old textbook method of confusing them, he therefore cannot believe in you.
Right. But there is one other bit of business. You were going to tell me whether we should make the patient an extreme patriot or an extreme pacifist. Though I'm puzzled. Doesn't it serve us better if he's tepid and lukewarm to either cause?
All extremes, except extreme devotion to the enemy, are to be encouraged. Not always, of course, but at this period. Some ages are lukewarm and complacent, and then it is our business to soothe them yet faster asleep. Other ages, of which the present is one, are unbalanced and prone to faction, and it is our business to inflame them. Any small clique, bound together by some interest which other men dislike or ignore, tends to develop inside itself a hothouse of mutual admiration, and towards the outer world, a great deal of pride and hatred, which is entertained without shame because the cause is its sponsor, and it is thought to be impersonal. Even when the little group exists originally for the enemy's own purposes, this remains true. We want the church to be small, not only that fewer men may know the enemy, but also that those who do may acquire the uneasy intensity and defensive self-righteousness of a secret society. The church herself is, of course, heavily defended, and we have never yet quite succeeded in giving her all the characteristics of a faction. But subordinate factions within her have often produced admirable results, from the parties of Paul and of Apollos at Corinth, down to the high and the low parties in the Church of England.
So, what shall it be? Pacifist or patriot?
If your patient can be induced to become a conscientious objector, he will automatically find himself one of a small, vocal, organized, and unpopular society. And the effects of this on one so new to Christianity will almost certainly be good.
Pacifist, then?
Not so fast. I said almost certainly. Has he had serious doubts about the lawfulness of serving in a just war before this present war began?
I don't know.
Is he a man of great physical courage, so great that he will have no half-conscious misgivings about the real motives of his pacifism? Can he, when nearest to honesty, no human is ever very near, feel fully convinced that he is actuated wholly by the desire to obey the enemy?
Well,
if he is that sort of man, his pacifism will probably not do us much good, and the enemy will probably protect him from the usual consequences of belonging to a sect. Your best plan in that case would be to attempt a sudden, confused, emotional crisis from which he might emerge as an uneasy convert to patriotism. Such things can often be managed, but if he is the man I take him to be, try pacifism.
Right.
Whichever he adopts, your main task will be the same. Let him begin by treating the patriotism or the pacifism as a part of his religion, and then let him, under the influence of partisan spirit, come to regard it as the most important part. Then quietly and gradually nurse him onto the stage at which the religion becomes merely part of the cause, in which Christianity is valued chiefly because of the excellent arguments it can produce in favor of the British war effort, or pacifism. The attitude which you want to guard against is that in which temporal affairs are treated primarily as material for obedience. Once you have made the world an end and faith a means, you have almost won your man, and it makes very little difference what kind of worldly end he is pursuing. Provided that meetings, pamphlets, policies, movements, causes, and crusades matter to him more than prayers and sacraments and charity, he is ours. And the more religious on those terms, the more securely ours. I could show you a pretty cageful in our father's house. Are you, finished with your silly theatrics?
Yes, Uncle.
Good, good, good. Now I suggest you get back to your post before your patient wakes up and does something good.